right, chapter 71, The House of Commons. Okay, I'm guessing this is us following Mr. Montague/Greenwood to his new seat in Parliament, where he's planning to play the people for his best advantage. The building in which the representatives of the nation assemble at Westminster is about as insignificant, ill-contrived, and inconvenient a place as can be well conceived. It is true that the edifices appropriated to both Lords and Commons are both only temporary ones. Nevertheless, it would have been easy to construct halls of assembly more suitable for their purposes than those that now exist. The House of Commons is an oblong, with rows of plain wooden benches on each side, leaving a space in the middle which is occupied by the table, whereon petitions are laid. At one end of this table is the mace, at the other sits the clerks who record all proceedings that require to be noted. Close behind the clerks and at one extremity of the apartment is the Speaker's chair. Galleries surround this hall of the assembly. The one for the reporters is immediately over the Speaker's chair. That for strangers occupies the other extremity of the oblong, and the two sides are for the use of the members. The ministers and their supporters occupy the benches on the right of the Speaker. The opposition members are seated on those to the left of that functionary. There are also cross benches under the strangers' gallery, where those members who fluctuate between ministerial and opposition opinions, occasionally supporting the one side or the other according to their pleasure or convictions, takes their place. At each extremity of the House there is a lobby, one behind the cross benches, the other behind the Speaker's chair, between which and the door of this latter lobby there is a high screen surmounted by the arms of the United Kingdom. When the House divides upon any question, those who vote for the motion or bill pass into one lobby, and those who vote against the point in question proceed to the other. Each party appoints its tellers, who station themselves at the respective doors of the two lobbies, and count the members on either side as they return into the House. The House is illuminated with bud lights and is ventilated by means of innumerable holes perforated through the floor, which is covered with thick hair matting. According to the above-mentioned arrangements of benches, it is evident that the orator, in whatever place he may sit, almost invariably has a considerable number of members behind him, or, at all events, sitting in places extremely inconvenient for hearing. Then the apartment itself is so miserably confined that when there is a full attendance of members, at least a fourth cannot obtain seats. It will scarcely be believed by those previously unaware of the fact that the reporters for the public press are only allowed to attend and take notes at the proceedings upon sufferance. Any one member can procure the clearance of both the reporters and the strangers' galleries without assigning any reason whatever. At 4:30 the members began to enter the House pretty thickly. Near the table stood a portly, happy-looking man with a somewhat florid and good-natured countenance, gray eyes and reddish hair. He was well dressed and wore enormous watch seals and a massive gold guard chain. He conversed in an easy and complacent manner with a few members who had gathered around him, and who appeared to receive his opinions with respect and survey him with profound admiration. This was Sir Robert Peel. One of his principal admirers on this, as on all other occasions, was a very stout gentleman with dark hair, prominent features, a full round face, eyes of a sleepy expression, and considerable heaviness of tone and manner. This was Sir James Graham. And for those of you not as familiar with history, they're naming real people here. So we're getting a little bit of a description of what they actually looked like and their personalities and stuff. Close by Sir James Graham, with whom he exchanged frequent signs of approval as Sir Robert Peel was conversing, was a small and somewhat repulsive-looking individual, with red hair, little eyes that kept constantly blinking, a fair complexion and diminutive features, very restless in manner, and with a disagreeable and ill-tempered expression of countenance. When he spoke, there was far more of gall than honey in his language, and the shafts of his satire, though dealt at his political opponents, not unfrequently glanced aside and struck his friends. This was Lord Stanley. Shortly before the Speaker took the chair, a stout burly man, accompanied by a half-dozen representatives of the Emerald Isle, entered the House. He was enveloped in a cloak, which he proceeded to doff in a very leisurely manner, and then turned to make some observation to his companions. They immediately burst out into a hearty laugh, for it was a joke that had fallen upon their ears. A joke, too, purposely delivered in the richest Irish brogue, and accompanied by so comical an expression of his round, good-natured countenance that the jest was altogether irresistible. intelligible. He then proceeded slowly to his seat, saying something good-natured to his various political friends as he passed along. His broad-brimmed hat he retained upon his head, but of his cloak he made a soft seat. His adherents immediately crowded around him, and while he told them some rich racy anecdote or delivered himself of another jest, his broad Irish countenance expanded into an expression of the most hearty and heartfelt good humor. And yet that man had much to occupy his thoughts and engage his attention, for he of whom we now speak was Daniel O'Connell. Close by Mr. O'Connell's place was seated a gentleman of most enormously portly form, though little above the middle height. On the wrong side of 60, he was as hale, robust, and healthy-looking as a man could be seen. His ample chest, massive limbs, ponderous body, and large head denoted strength of no ordinary kind. His hair was iron gray, rough and bushy, his eyes large, gray, and intelligent, his countenance rigid in expression, although broad and round in shape. This was Joseph Hume. Precisely at 4:45, the speaker took the chair. Mr. Greenwood was then introduced by the Tory whipper-in, and, as the papers said the next morning, took the oaths and his seat for Rottenborough. The Whig whipper-in surveyed him with a glance of indignant disappointment, but Mr. Greenwood affected not to notice the feeling which his conduct had excited. On the contrary, he passed over to the opposition benches, for it must be remembered that the Whigs then occupied the ministerial seat, where his accession to the Tory ranks was very warmly greeted, being the more pleasant as it was totally unexpected, by Sir Robert Peel and the other leaders of that party. Mr. Greenwood was not a man to allow the grass to grow under his feet. He accordingly delivered his maiden speech that very evening. The question before the House was connected with the condition of the poor. The new member was fortunate enough to catch the speaker's eye in the course of the debate, and he accordingly delivered his sentiments upon the topic. He declared that the idea of a diminution of duties upon foreign produce was a mere delusion. The people, he said, were in a most prosperous condition. They never were more prosperous, but they were eternal grumblers whom nothing could satisfy. Although some of the most enlightened men in the kingdom devoted themselves to the interests of the people, he alluded to the party amongst whom he had the honor to sit, the people were not satisfied. For his part, he thought that there was too much of what was called freedom. He would punish all malcontents with a little wholesome exercise upon the treadmill. What presumption, he would like to know, could be greater than that of the millions daring to have an opinion of their own, unless it were the audacity of attempting to make that opinion the rule for those who sat in the House. He was astounded when he heard the misrepresentations that had just met his ears from honorable gentlemen opposite relative to the condition of the working classes. He could prove that they ought to put money in the savings banks, and yet it was coolly alleged that in entire districts they wanted bread. Well, why did they not live upon potatoes? He could demonstrate, by the evidence of chemists and naturalists, that potatoes were far more wholesome than bread, and for his part he was much attached to potatoes. Indeed, he often ate his dinner without touching a single mouthful of bread. There was a worthy alderman at his right, who could no doubt prove to the House that bread spoilt the taste of turtle. Was it not, then, a complete delusion to raise such a clamor about bread? He, Mr. Greenwood, was really astonished at honorable gentlemen opposite, and he could give their measure his most strenuous opposition at every stage. So, I guarantee you poor people in this country aren't starving, they're just lazy. And so what if they don't have bread? They can eat potatoes instead. The point isn't they don't have bread, the point is they don't have food. Oh, what a good guy. Mr. Greenwood sat down amidst loud cheers from the Tory party, and Sir Robert Peel turned round and gave him a patronizing nod of most gracious approval. Indeed, his speech must have created a very powerful sensation, for upwards of 50 members who had been previously stretched upon the benches in the galleries, comfortably snoozing, rose up in the middle of their nap to listen to him. The Conservative papers next morning spoke in raptures of the brilliancy of the new talent which had thus suddenly developed itself in the political heaven, while the Liberal prints denounced Greenwood's language as the most insane farrago of anti-popular trash ever heard during the present century. Mr. Greenwood cared nothing for these attacks. He had gained his aims. He had already taken a stand amongst the party with whom he had determined to act. He had won the smiles of the leader of that party, and he chuckled within himself as he saw baronetcies in the perspective. That night he could not sleep. His ideas were reflected back to the time when, poor, obscure, and friendless, he had commenced his extraordinary career in the city of London. A very few years had passed. He was now rich and in a fair way to becoming influential and renowned. The torch of fortune seemed ever to light his way, and never to shine obscurely for him in the momentous affairs of life. Like the fabled light of the Rosicrucian's ever-burning lamp, the halo of that torch appeared constantly to attend upon his steps. Whether he thus prospered to the end, the sequel of our tale must show. So, Mr. Greenwood's feeling pretty good about himself. He's made quite the speech in Parliament, which the point of which was just to gain attention, not to actually accomplish anything. And he is feeling pretty proud of himself for how well fortune has smiled on him thus far. And the author has hinted that we will find out in this course of this story whether or not that continues to hold true. So, all right, there you are. We'll see you for the next chapter.